Alright guys, so we're going to go back over some of the notes that you had the opportunity to take previously. For my students, you should have already taken these notes. For Miss Ween's students, this was before I started making videos, so you had the opportunity to take the notes, but I know some of you didn't, and you probably should have. If you didn't, then take this opportunity to take some notes now, even though you might just be watching the video. Taking the notes might help you out in the long run so you actually know what you're doing. So, let's go over this warm-up. So, previously we should have already seen how to use the Pythagorean theorem. If you haven't, that's not good, but that's what we're going to use here. So, if you remember, Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equal to c squared. So here we have our a is our x, or b, doesn't matter. A and b, doesn't matter which one's which, but they're going to be one of the legs of the right triangle. So here we can have x or 7 be a or b, it doesn't matter which one. So we're going to go x squared plus 7 squared equal to our hypotenuse, which is c, that's the 12. So x squared, 7 squared is 49, equal to 12 squared is 144. I'm going to subtract 49 from both sides. Cancels on the left. Left with x squared equal to 95. So we square root both sides. So just x now is equal to the square root of 95, which is about 9.7. So either of those is an acceptable answer. It depends on how it's asked. Or if it's multiple choice, what the choices are. If the choices are decimals, then find the decimal. Choices are in square root, you can leave it as a square root. Our second one, another right triangle here. It's the diagonal of the rectangle, and we're trying to find our x, which is that diagonal. So that's our hypotenuse. So it's going to be 13 squared plus 38 squared equal to x squared. 13 squared is 169, and 38 squared is 1444. Equal to x squared. And add these up, and we get 1613 equal to x squared. And if we square root both sides, x comes out to be the square root of 1613, which again, you can't really split up that, believe it or not, but that comes out to be about 40.2. So again, depending on how it's asked, it might tell you to round, it might not. If it doesn't, you're good where you are without doing the square root. If it does ask you to round to a specific decimal, then go ahead and do the square root and figure out what that is. Alright, so our first thing of notes here, the theorem for the 45, 45, 90 triangle. So this is going to make it to where you don't have to use Pythagorean theorem anymore, unless you really, really want to. But the theory behind this is using the Pythagorean theorem. So let me show you what I mean by that. So here we have our triangle, 45, 45, 90. We have that, we got two equal sides, right? Those are our legs, so L squared plus L squared is equal to H squared. So we have two L squareds, right? So 2L squared is equal to H squared. So now what we would end up doing is square rooting both sides to get our hypotenuse. So H is equal to the square root of 2L squared. Because the L is squared, we can remove that, and H is equal to L square root 2, which, if you notice, is the formula they have right there. Now the alternative to this is solving for L. So we would have H squared, or H. So at this point we can actually just solve it for H by dividing by, so we got L square root of 2, we divide by square root of 2. Now technically you don't want to have that, but in a formula it's not going to hurt anything. But your answer cannot leave the square root on the bottom. So when you're solving this, I don't want to get rid of it, because if you do have a hypotenuse given to you with a square root in it, which you will have on occasion, then you can immediately eliminate it and you're good. If you get rid of it, then you might not notice that, and then you might have some struggles. So for a right triangle, or for a 45, 45, 90 triangle, these are your two formulas that I just wrote down at the end. That if you got H, you can find L. If you got L, you can find H. So hopefully you've written all this down. Here's the next slide. So our first example with this is pretty basic. So we're going to start by finding our hypotenuse. Our hypotenuse, and we're given our leg is 9. So we know L is 9. Our H is X. So we want to know that, or we already know that H is equal to L square root 2. So if we plug in L to this, and we plug in our H, which is X, then X is equal to 9 square root 2. And at this point, that's pretty good. You don't really need to go any further than that. Typically, that's how your answers are going to be in this situation. Now, in the off chance that you actually do want to find the decimal, this is about 12.7. Both of those are the correct answer. Okay, question B does the same thing. We want to find our hypotenuse, but now you notice our legs have square root 2's in them. So that does make it actually a bit more difficult, and I'll show you why. So we have that the wrong problem. Our L is 6 square root 2. H is still X, and we know that H is equal to L square root 2. So when we plug in what we do know, so H is equal to X, L is equal to 6 square root 2, and that's got to be multiplied by square root 2. When you multiply two square roots that have the same number inside of the square root, so in this case 2, then you can get rid of the square root and just multiply the 6 by 2. Because technically, this stuff right here in parentheses is just squaring the square root of 2, which gives you just 2, right? So X is equal to 6 times 2 now, and X is equal to 12. So a little bit more work, a couple more steps in there involved, but still fairly simple, right? No need to get a decimal here. We don't have a square root to deal with anyway. So our next problem, we have a multiple choice question here, similar to our first one we did. So again, write everything out. We know that our hypotenuse is X, we know that our leg is 7, and we know that the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times square root 2. So that means, again, our hypotenuse, X, is equal to our leg 7 times square root 2. And notice our answers do have square roots in some of them. There's one with a decimal, but we have our answer already. That's one of our choices. And really, if you wanted to get this in decimal, you could, but it isn't 3.5. It's not dividing the 7 by 2. It comes out to be about 9.9. So that means our answer is C. Next question is just like the second one we did. So we have our square root 2 inside of our legs. So again, H is equal to X. L is equal to 8 square root 2. H is equal to L times square root 2. And that means that our H is X equal to 8 square root 2, or L, times square root 2. And again, square roots will get canceled out. And we're left with X equal to 8 times 2. And 8 times 2 is 16. So again, our answer here is C. All right, moving on to our next problem. I know we're kind of going a little fast, but since these are kind of review notes, I don't really want to make the video too long. But you can always pause it, try to figure out what's going on yourself, Test yourself. Make sure and have pride in what you do, right? This is why you are watching this video in the first place. You want to know how to do these things. You want to educate yourself. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this stuff. You'd just be sitting around playing games on your iPad or phone or Snapchatting away. All right. So now this next example, it's a bit more complicated. We're given our hypotenuse, and we need to find the leg. So now we're going to use that other formula I showed you earlier. The leg is equal to the hypotenuse over square root 2. So again, we know our hypotenuse is 8. We know our legs here are A. And we want to know that the leg is equal to the hypotenuse divided by square root 2. So, once again, plug everything in. L is A. Our H is our hypotenuse of 8 over square root 2. Now, if you remember back when I was going over how to do the square root 2, or how to get this formula that we're using, I said that we can't have a square root on the bottom of our fraction. So now it will come into play, okay? So even though our hypotenuse doesn't have a square root 2 in it, we can't leave the square root 2 on the bottom. So what you're going to do is multiply by 1. And by that, I mean you're going to multiply by the same thing on top of the same thing. So square root 2 over square root 2. Because we know that when we multiply square root 2 times square root 2, the square roots will cancel, and the bottom of this, the denominator, will become just 2. So we now have 8 times square root 2 over 2. And that can actually simplify, because 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 4 square root 2. And there's our answer. So, like I said, a little bit more complicated, but not overly complicated. Just kind of depends on your overall math skills, which really you should have learned. As you can tell, I'm doing this during the school day, during my conference period. Sorry about the bell. I meant to pause it before that happened, but oh well, it happened. So moving on, basically, there's your answer. Not too complicated, but in Algebra 2, if you didn't take it already, you should have learned this probably towards the end of Algebra 1, but square root over square root, or square root of the same number times the square root of that same number is equal to just that number. Next one. So number 2, we got another example just like this. Same process. So we know that H is 6, we know that L is B, and we know that L is equal to H over square root 2. Now, these formulas only work for these specific types of triangle. Can't use these for any old right triangle. And we do have one more special right triangle we're going to talk about that you can't use these on either. So they'll have their own set of formulas. So we replace everything. B is equal to, I don't know what just happened, my iPad decided I want to change apps in the middle of this. So our B is equal to the H, which is 6, over square root 2. So again, we multiply by square root 2 over square root 2 to get rid of that square root on the bottom. So 6 times square root 2 over square root 2 times square root 2 is just 2. And 6 is even, so we can simplify this further. 6 divided by 2 is 3 square root 2. And that means that no decimals here. Our answer comes out to be A, 3 square root 2. Alright, so here's the other special right triangle. The 30, 60, 90 right triangle has the length of the hypotenuse is H, which is 2 times the length of the shorter leg, S. So short leg, S stands for short leg, right? The length of the longer leg is our L here, and it is the square root 3 times the length of the shorter leg. So you've got 2 formulas already given to you, but I'm going to show you again through Pythagorean theorem why these are what they are. So we have actually I'm not going to show you how this came to be. It's a bit more complicated on this one than the others, and I'm pretty sure it uses trig instead of the Pythagorean theorem, especially with that square root of 3 going on in there. So instead, I'm just going to show you all the 4 equations. I think there's just 3. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, the equations you're going to need for this. So the 2 that are already given to you, h is equal to 2s, and we know that L is equal to S square root 3. So I'm going to give you the other 4 formulas also. So H in terms of L in terms of H, and then S in terms of H and L. So basically what we're going to do here is solve these 2 for S. So first one, we're going to divide by 2 on the first one, cancels it on the right side, and we're left with S being equal to H over 2. So here, if you're given if you're given the H, you can find S from that just by dividing by 2. For the other side, you divide by square root 3, and again, the formula is the formula, but when you actually solve for something, you do not leave the square root on the bottom. So S here is equal to L over square root 3. So there's our S formulas in terms of each other. Now what we're going to do is plug them into the original 2 equations. So H in terms of S will become H times 2 L over square root 3. So that is our formula. We don't have to do anything to it. So H is in terms of L there. And then the other way around, L is S square root 3. We know that L is equal to the H, or S, sorry, is H over 2 times square root 3, which gives you just L equal to H square root 3 over 2. So now you have, between the 4 formulas I just gave you here and the 2 formulas in the wording, you have every means to just, whatever you're given, so you're given a leg, the longer leg, and you want to find the shorter side, you have the formula for it. And basically anything that's given to you, you now have the formula to find anything else. Okay? So make sure you memorize these, keep them in your mind, use them. They are in your toolbox now. So, using those, here's 2 things here. We have our short side given to us, and we know it's a short side because it's across from the smallest angle. That's the 30-degree angle. We also have to find our hypotenuse and the longer side. They are x and y here. So just like before, what we're going to do here is actually write out everything we have. So we have that S is equal to 4 square root 3 over 3. H is equal to y. L is equal to x. We know that since we have S, we know that H, so we're going to use the 2 original formulas, is equal to 2s, and we know that L is equal to S square root 3. So those are the 2 formulas we're about to use. So plugging everything in for the first one, we have that H is y equal to 2 times our S, which is the 4 square root 3 over 3. Now we can simplify that. 2 times 4 is 8. 8 doesn't divide by 3 evenly, so we're just going to leave it as this beautiful fraction here. 8 square root 3 over 3. And that's our answer for y. Now, for x, we know that x is our L. So x is equal to S, which is 4 square root 3 over 3 times square root 3. Now again, remember when we multiply square roots, if they have the same number inside, they just get rid of the square root and you're multiplying by the number. So that means we have x equal to 4 times 3 over 3 now. The 3's are going to cancel. And we're left with x equal to 4. And that's it. So we got our x and our y using our two original formulas that they gave us. Now, the reason they did that one first is because the two formulas that they gave you, you don't have to do any manipulation to the actual formula, like I did. But we have all those formulas now because I gave them to you, so we can get going and do the rest of these. Should be fairly simple. So, our next example here, we have that the long leg now is given to us, and that is the 4 square root. 4 square root 3 is our L. We don't know our S, but that is a B side BA. We're going to leave our S's and our H's as they are. But what we're really looking for here is BC, which is our H. So that's what we're really looking for here. But the problem is, in the process, we have to get our small side in that process. So in order to do that, we need to use that formula first, and then we'll work our way to the hypotenuse. So we have our L, we know, is equal to S square root 3, but we said earlier, and I manipulated the formula to make S equal to L over square root 3, and when we plug in our L here, that's going to be 4 square root 3 over square root 3. Nice thing here about the being over square root 3 is that those are going to cancel, and we're left with S being 4. Now that we have our S, getting H is quite easy, because we know that H is equal to 2S. H is equal to 2 times 4. So H is 8. So it's B. Now, I'm going to show you what I meant by having those formulas before, right? The ones that I wrote down. See all the work I had to do? I had to do 2 steps to get there, right? You don't have to do that, because if you have the formulas that I showed you earlier, you can solve this one equation and be done. So before, I said that H was equal to 2L over square root 3. So now if we plug in what we have for L, H is equal to 2 times 4 square root 3 over square root 3. And again, those are going to cancel. 2 times 4 is what we're left with, and H is 8. Boom. One move, done. Didn't have to use 2 equations, which is why I showed you all those formulas in the first place. So now we got our answer twice, the same answer 2 times. It is 8. It is B. Let's move on. Here's our last example before our exit ticket. We have a quilt here. The quilt has the design shown in the figure, in which a square is divided to 8 isosceles right triangles. If the length of one side of the square is 3 inches, what are the dimensions of each triangle? So, first off, let's break down what we just read. So we know that these are 8 isosceles triangles. Isosceles means that 2 of the 2 legs are the same. So each of these triangles is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. And each of these marks I'm making are showing you all the equal sides. So all those are the same. So if we look at just this triangle at the top here, I just told you that it's a 45, 45, 90 triangle, which we know because of them being isosceles. So this is 45, and this is 45. We also know that because of those tick marks, we can see the side that's 3 inches is split into 2 even sizes, right? So, to get our L, so let's label these. We are looking for our H, we're looking for L. L is equal to 3 over 2, And 3 divided by 2 is 1.5 inches. So that's our L. All right. So now we need to find our H from that. We know that H is equal to L square root 2. Had a brain fart there. H is equal to 1.5 square root 2. So when we actually want to find out the numbers here, because we are talking about an actual dimension of something, that is going to be 2.12. And that's it. Got our two answers: the height and the hypotenuse and the length of the leg for all of these triangles here. So here's your exit ticket. If you missed out on it, don't worry about it. But if you want to give it a try, go for it. I'm not going to show you the answer. And until next time, keep on keeping on.